Sunday evening, 1956. The rest of America sat in front of the television. Ed Sullivan's voice came through the speaker at 8 o'clock, predictable as the clock. In the living rooms of Dayton and Detroit and Sacramento, families gathered on sofas, children in pajamas, fathers with coffee, mothers with mending in their laps. It was the same in nearly every house on every block across the country. But not in hers. She was in the bathroom. The door closed, the fan humming, the counter covered with things that would take 2 hours to work through. A jar of cold cream, a comb, 40 metal pins lined up in a row, a bottle of nail polish remover that smelled like acetone and something vaguely medicinal. The mirror in front of her reflected a woman still wearing the day on her face, lipstick faded at the center, powder settled into the lines she did not yet have but would spend the rest of her life preparing for. She unscrewed the lid on the cold cream. The smell filled the small room, clean and faintly chemical, a smell every woman of that era would recognize without needing to name the brand. Pond's. Noxzema, something her mother used and her mother's mother before that. She scooped 2 fingers into the jar and began. This was Sunday night. This was what Monday morning required. Before we go further, subscribe. This channel exists to show you the world nobody photographed, the hours nobody counted, the work that happened when the camera wasn't looking. Hit that button. Let's go. The cold cream went on thick. She worked it into her skin in slow circles, dissolving the day, erasing the face she'd worn since morning. Makeup in the 1950s was not optional. It was the baseline. A woman did not leave the house without it, did not answer the door without it, would not have dreamed of being seen by the mailman or the neighbor or her own husband at breakfast without her face in place. The cold cream was the only moment in the week when that face came completely off. She wiped it away with a cotton square, then another, then a third. The cotton came away beige and pink and black from the mascara she'd been wearing since 7 o'clock that morning. In the mirror, her skin looked raw, younger, more like the girl she'd been 5 years ago, before she understood what it meant to maintain an image in a world that was always watching. But the cold cream was just the beginning. Next came the toner. Witch hazel or rose water or something astringent that tightened the skin and made it feel clean in a way soap never quite managed. The cotton pad went over her face in the same upward motions she'd been taught. Never down, always up. Gravity was already working against her. There was no reason to help it along. Then the night cream, heavier than the cold cream, richer, something that would sit on her skin for the next 8 hours while she slept and do whatever night creams were supposed to do in 1956. The jar promised younger skin, firmer skin, skin that would look the same at 30 as it had at 22. She did not believe the jar, but she used it anyway because every other woman she knew used it, and not using it felt like falling behind in a race nobody had agreed to run, but everyone was running anyway. Her nails were next. She soaked them in a shallow dish of warm, soapy water while she waited for the night cream to absorb. 5 minutes. The water went lukewarm. She lifted her hands out and dried them carefully, then trimmed the cuticles with a pair of small, sharp scissors that required steadiness and attention. One slip and the cuticle bled and the whole week's manicure was ruined. She filed each nail into the same oval shape. Not too long, not too short. Exactly the length that looked polished without looking vain, maintained without looking high maintenance. It was a narrow space to occupy, and every woman in 1956 knew exactly where that space was, without anyone needing to explain it. Then came the polish. 2 coats of color, 1 coat of clear on top. She sat with her hands flat on the counter while the polish dried. 20 minutes of forced stillness in a week that rarely allowed for stillness of any kind. The bathroom smelled like acetone and nail polish and cold cream. It was a smell specific to Sunday night, a smell that meant preparation, a smell that meant Monday was coming, and Monday required a version of herself that did not yet exist, but would by morning. While the polish dried, she shaped her eyebrows. This part required tweezers and a steady hand and a willingness to pull out 1 hair at a time, until the brow formed a line so precise it looked like it had always been that way. It had not always been that way. Eyebrows grew where they wanted to grow. The arch, the taper, the clean space between the brows was manufactured weekly in bathrooms across America by women who understood that an untended eyebrow communicated carelessness, and carelessness was not something a respectable woman allowed herself to communicate. Then the hair. This was the longest part. This was the part that separated Sunday night from every other night of the week. She sectioned her hair into squares. Small squares, each one no bigger than a postage stamp. She combed each section smooth, wrapped it around 2 fingers, and pinned it flat against her head with a metal clip. By the time she finished, her head was covered in 40 small spirals, each one held in place by a pin that dug slightly into her scalp and would continue to dig for the next 8 hours while she tried to sleep. The pin curls were not comfortable. They were not meant to be comfortable. They were meant to produce the waves that would appear in her hair Monday morning when she unpinned them and combed them out. Waves that would look effortless, natural, like her hair simply did that on its own. It did not do that on its own. It did that because she spent 2 hours on Sunday night making it do that. She tied a silk scarf over the curls to hold them in place and looked at herself in the mirror. The scarf, the pins underneath, the night cream thick on her face, the nails still drying. She did not look glamorous. She looked like someone preparing for glamour, and that was the part nobody photographed. Stay with this next part because it explains something important. The women who looked perfect on Monday morning were not born that way. They were not genetically blessed with waves that held their shape or skin that stayed tight or nails that grew in neat ovals. What they had was a system. A weekly system that required 2 hours on Sunday night and another hour Monday morning and constant maintenance throughout the week. The perfection was not effortless. It was highly effortful. It just looked effortless because the effort happened in private. In 1956, this system was simply how things worked. Every woman on her block was doing the same thing at the same time. Her mother had done it. Her mother's mother had done it. The ritual was passed down not as a burden but as knowledge, as the price of being a woman who cared about her appearance, which in 1956 meant being a woman who cared about being taken seriously, being respected, being seen as someone who had not let herself go. But here is what that system required. It required time. 2 hours every Sunday, an hour every morning, 15 minutes to fix the hair at midday if the wind undid it, 30 minutes to remove it all at night and start the preservation process over again. It required products. The cold cream, the night cream, the toner, the polish, the remover. It required tools, the pins, the tweezers, the scissors, the comb. And it required the belief that this was necessary, that the work was worth the result, that the woman who did not do this work would be left behind by the women who did. The television was still on in the other room. Ed Sullivan introduced the next act. Her husband called from the living room to ask if she was coming out. She called back that she would be out in a minute. She was not out in a minute. She was out in 20 minutes after she'd checked the pins one more time and wiped the excess night cream from her hairline and made sure the nail polish was dry enough that she would not smudge it when she sat down. When she finally came out, she sat on the edge of the sofa with her hands resting carefully on her lap, her head held slightly away from the cushion so the pins would not shift. Her husband glanced at her, at the scarf, at the careful way she was sitting. He did not ask what she had been doing for the past 2 hours. He already knew. Every wife did this. It was simply what Sunday night looked like. Then something changed. The change did not arrive all at once. It arrived in pieces. Permanent press fabric in the 1960s meant clothes no longer needed ironing. Wash and wear hair products in the 1970s meant curls could be set with foam instead of pins. By the 1980s, the 2-hour Sunday night ritual had been replaced with a 20-minute routine that promised the same results with a fraction of the effort. Convenience was sold as liberation, and in many ways it was. The woman in 1985 did not spend 2 hours every Sunday preparing for Monday. She spent 20 minutes. She did not sleep with 40 pins digging into her scalp. She used a curling iron the next morning. But something else changed too. The standard shifted. The woman in 1956 who spent 2 hours on Sunday night looked polished on Monday morning. The woman in 1985 who spent 20 minutes looked acceptable. And the woman who spent 2 hours looked like she was trying too hard. The effort that had once been expected became suspect. The ritual that had once been normal became excessive. The pins, the cold cream, the careful Sunday preparation were replaced by products that promised to do the same job faster, easier, with less visible labor. And they did do the job faster, but they did not do the same job. The cold cream ritual was not just about removing makeup. It was about taking time to care for the face, to pay attention to the skin, to notice what was changing and what needed attention. The pin curls were not just about creating waves. They were about sitting still, about dedicating time to preparation, about accepting that beauty required patience. When the products replaced the ritual, the time disappeared. And with the time went something harder to name: the care, the attention, the belief that this part of the week mattered enough to protect it from everything else that wanted that time. She did not know, sitting there on Sunday night in 1956 with 40 pins in her hair, that she was part of a system that would be gone in 30 years. She did not know that her daughter would find the whole thing incomprehensible, that her granddaughter would not own a single pin curl clip, that the 2-hour Sunday night ritual would become a historical curiosity rather than a lived practice. She just knew it was Sunday, and Sunday night meant preparation. And Monday morning meant showing up looking like someone who had it together, even if getting it together required sitting in a bathroom for 2 hours with a jar of cold cream and a head full of pins. Here is the part that stays with me. The women who looked perfect in 1956 were not more disciplined than we are. They were not more committed to beauty or more willing to suffer for it. They were living in a world that had built a structure around beauty, a weekly rhythm that made the preparation automatic rather than optional, expected rather than exceptional. The structure disappeared. What replaced it was flexibility, convenience, speed. All good things. But the woman who wants to look the way women looked in 1956 no longer has the structure to support her. She has to build it herself, which means she has to choose it every week, which means it never quite becomes automatic. The perfection was not genetic. It was structural, and when the structure dissolved, the perfection went with it. There is a photograph somewhere. Sunday night, bathroom counter, a woman in a house robe with a scarf tied over her pin curls. She is not looking at the camera. She is looking at herself in the mirror, checking the pins one last time before bed. Nobody kept that photograph because nobody thought it was worth keeping. It was just Sunday night. It was just what you did. It would always be what you did. It was not always what you did. If this landed somewhere, if it made you think about the hours nobody photographed, subscribe. Next time we are going somewhere else she lived. A place where the rules were written down and the consequences were real. I will see you there.